Welcome to Project 10, your last project. It's a lot like Project 9, except we have a base class and we're inheriting from that, or deriving from that, a subclass or a child class. So if you look at the assignment for this project, it's on page 643. It's Programming Problem 1, Employee and Production Worker Class. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that a production worker is a type of employee. So in order to separate this data and sort of abstract in the design a little bit, we're going to have a base class called employee. It's going to have a name and number, and then we're going to derive from that employee class production worker. So it will inherit all of the properties and methods from the employee class when we declare the production worker class. So if you go back to page, I believe it's 608, figure 10-2, they're using a car or an automobile, because an automobile can be a lot of different things, but a car is of type automobile. All right. So in this case, the base class goes on the right of that colon. So the colon is the derivation indicator, basically. Indicates that the class is derived from the base class. You can call it the derived class, you can call it a child class. The text uses the term derived because it's derived from the base class. So car is the derived class in this figure, and it's derived from the base class, which is automobile. Okay. All right, now you can see here that I have a form. My project's already set up, kind of, and we have label text box, label text box. I have a container. I've got two radio buttons, day 1, day 2. I got a label in a text box. I got an output label, display button, and an exit button. All right. Now, there are different ways to do this, okay? I'm taking the simple route here with these radio buttons because it's not really germane at this point to what we're doing. We're looking at classes more than methods and that kind of stuff. I'll show you what I've got and how it works, and you can take it from there. Stop the video and code it. Anyway, one thing I want to remind you about, or a couple of things, is this form needs to be set to center screen in the start position. And then, of course, you'll want to put something in the text. I just put production worker class out there. You could put worker class if you wanted to. The other thing is, let's look at the and I've been noticing this. It's not a real big deal, but you need to get used to it. Let's see. Let me go back here. Select the form again. Go to View, and we want to look at tab order. Remember from previous work that we've done that labels cannot accept focus. In other words, you can't set the focus and have that little cursor sitting there flashing like it's ready to take input, because it can't take input. It's a label. It's just used for output, right? However, if you set the tab order right, you can have that focus go to the object next in line. So these two are paired together, right? That's just the label telling the user that they're going to put the employee name to the right. So if I set it to 0 and 1, what's going to happen as soon as this form loads, it's going to try to set focus to the first number in the tab order, which is 0. Well, it's a label, so it can't take focus. What happens? It throws it over here to the next one, which is 1. That's a text box. So that cursor is going to automatically go there and start flashing, right? So when they tab, around on here, it's going to go to 2 after it goes to 1. Well, that can't take focus, so it throws it over here. So essentially what's happening is, to the user, it's going from here to here. And then we've got, 4.4 for the container. Of course, it always does a 4.1 in there. And I've got 5 for this label, which throws it over to 6. And 7 can't take focus because it's nothing more than a label, so it throws it over here to the display button. So if they hit the tab and hit enter, it'll go, and then exit is number 9. Okay, so make sure you do get in the habit of doing that, regardless of the language that you're using. It's just good practice. All right. So we have 2 classes according to the text: employee and production worker. And employee has 2 properties, and production worker has 2 properties. All right. So let's go ahead and look at employee first. Now remember, in order to add a class, you just click on the program name, come over here to add, new item, Make sure you got your language set to Visual C, C Sharp, and then you select class and come in here and type the name. Don't use the default name. You want to type employee and hit add, okay? And you can do the same thing for this one. Let's go ahead and look at the details for the employee class. Now remember that in all these classes so far, we have properties that are set private, and we have two here, name and number. Remember that they're the way they're named, these properties are named is underscore all lowercase, okay? So underscore name, underscore number. And notice I've got my regions all set up. This is the default constructor, and we know it's the default because it has the same name as the class, and there are no arguments in the argument list, all right? And essentially, it's just setting, it's calling these accessors, right? In order to set or get these, we have to have a public accessor that's public to members of this class. So when this constructor hits here, it's going to assign, it's either going to get or set a value that's passed in. All right? We haven't passed anything in yet, but that's basically it. So you got three areas of this class. Now you can add methods to it as well. We haven't done that because it's, there's nothing much to do. So we have properties 2. We have the default constructor, which calls the accessors, and these are both read and write, which they need to be in order to add things to them and retrieve things from them. Okay, so this is our base class. All right, now let's look at production worker. It's very simple as well. The difference here is, again, I think it's on 608, figure 10-2, you can see that the class, the derived class, is called production worker because a production worker is a type of employee. So it's going to inherit the properties and methods from employees so that production worker has access to that, okay? So we have two properties here, and they are shift number, which is of type integer, and hourly rate, which is of type double. Why do you want it double? Because it could be 15.7, $15.75 an hour, or whatever it happens to be. And again, they're private. And here's my default constructor. It does the same thing as we set up an employee, only it's dealing with these properties. And here are accessors. We have two. Right? They're both read-write. The types are different, but the types have to match the type of your properties up here. Okay, remember that. Shift num and hourly rate. Okay, so those are our two classes. Now let's look at how this works in main. Notice that I did not set either one of these to checked. Probably not a good way to do it, but it's quicker. Otherwise, I'd have to, set this to checked in design view and then put a form load event in there so that that particular property would be set to 1 as the default. Well, they might, there's different ways to do that. This is the easiest way right now. Okay, I've got my class level declarations. See here, this is derived too. Form is systems.windows.form. So we're inheriting, when we created our little child here, or it does it for us, this is code behind stuff. That's the derived name. We called it form main, and it's actually being derived from form. So all the methods and properties of this object right here, we have access to, only we didn't have to do it. We just added it. It's doing all that stuff behind the scenes for us. All right, here's our declaration section. Production PD worker. All right, so this is the base class in here, and this is our child. This is our parent. Now remember, production worker is derived from employee, so it has access to all of its methods and properties as well. So it just kind of adds it all in there. And you kind of keep things separated, abstracted, they like to call it. And it's a better method of handling things. You don't have to put everything in one class and try to figure out who's an employee and who's a production worker and all that. It just lends itself to a good object-oriented design. So we're saying, okay, take this parent class, create a child from it, and we have the new operator, which breathes life into the little child here by calling the constructor, which sort of loads it into memory and sets the default state, okay? All right, so we have a button display, which you've already created. Now, if it's not the default event, then you'll have to go over here and create the event. You can't just type this stuff in, because you can, but it won't run because it's not wired to the code behind. There's a callback function that it creates it's really nice because you don't have to do any of that stuff. It's doing it for you. So you actually either have to double click on the object to create this event handler, or you'll have to go over here and select the form or select that button and click on your little lightning bolt events section. Find the event you want. In this case, it is the default event, but in a minute we're going to show you that one of them is not on the radio buttons, and there's a reason for that. So you just type in button display underscore click, and it'll add that event handler to your code, right? Just like it does when you double click on something. So since that's the default event, you can just double click on the button and it'll create it. Now what we have here, remember, always put a try catch anywhere that you're doing anything, okay? If you're using arrays, if you're opening and closing files, if you're hitting a database, going out to the internet, whatever you happen to be doing, printing, anything that can throw an error needs to be set into a try catch block pair. Otherwise, that error is going to try to be handled at the form level, and if it can't be handled there, it's going to try to handle it at the program level. And if it can't handle it there, then the system's going to jump in, the operating system, and throw some kind of obtuse error and shut your program down. So if the user's doing a lot of data entry, and they're going to lose everything. They're not going to be happy. This way, they won't lose anything. It'll just stop and say there's an error and display it, okay, in the catch section. It's just a message. Not great, but I mean, there are better ways to do it. And you can have custom catches as well. You can say, divide by zero, exception, overflow exception, different things. If you know what those exceptions are, you can handle them individually that way. I always just use default at first because it's easy to code, right? And that's what this is, default exception handler object. If everything works out all right, we've already created our little PD worker child class up here. So all we're going to do is pull the text out of the text box. It's just like we did in the last one. This one, so we got name, number. They're converting it. You could have stored it as a string, but that's just the way I did it. Int.parse, text imp number.text. So you're pulling it out of the text box, trying to convert it to an integer. If it fails, it'll throw this catch over here, see? So if they put ABC123, that's not going to convert to an integer. It's alphanumeric. So that's kind of a little bit of data validation there. But anyway, if it does, it just assigns it here. And we got an hourly rate. The reason we have the hourly rate is because production worker is derived from the base class of employee. That's where that is, okay? And so it has all the properties and methods of the parent or the base class. That's how we get away with that, right? So PD worker has a name property, a number property, a shift number, and an hourly rate because these are part of the employee class, which is the base class from which production worker was derived. Remember on page 608, you can take a look at figure 10-2. That tells you everything you need to know about how that's working. Okay, it's kind of neat, really. All right, so let's close this one up. All right, RDO day 1 underscore click and RDO day 2 check change. Now check change is the default event, so you can double click on the second radio button to create that event handler. But you can't double click on the first one to create the click event because it's not the default event. So you have to go over here and find click and type in RDO day 1, which you have it selected in your events menu, and it'll create the event handler for you and wire it all in together. Remember, that's how you get non-default event handlers, and there's all kinds of them in here. Tab stop, text change, validated, leave, mouse over, mouse out, key down, key press. This is all sorts of things. You can do tons of things. The only thing to remember when you're doing this stuff is you have to understand in what order these events are fired, or you can get into a recursive situation where it just sucks all the memory out of the computer and hoses your program, okay? That's something you might want to look at, and it happens with all of these Visual Studio languages that use a GUI type form. Now, this isn't set, so when they come in here to set that, they got to click on one or the other, all right? That's going to fire a click event, and it might or might not fire the check change, depends, probably will. If they check RDO day 2, this will fire. If they click on RDO day 1, this will fire, right? And finally, so all we're doing is setting the PD worker.shiftNum to whatever value. So if you look at the form I've got on here, I've got day is 1 and night is 2, and that's just sort of a reminder to us what's going on here. It's really not needed for the user. So the shift number for day is 1, the shift number for night is 2. Of course, you know how to do the button exit. All right. The downside to this is, it's not important. That's why I didn't go into the trouble of adding a form load event and doing all sorts of stuff like that. If they don't click one of these, that property is going to remain at 0, and you're going to get a 0 shift number. But I don't really care. I just want you to know that that's an issue. It's getting picky, but all right, let's run it, and then I'll go back in and put some breakpoints in so you can see what's going on. So if they come in here and type this and skip this, neither one of these are set, all right? So I'll type 25. Now watch what happens to the shift number when the display here is 0. There is no 0 shift number. So we're going to, just for expediency, there's ways to fix that. It's just not important. We're going to assume that they're going to click one of those, all right? So let's run it again. Oops. Type something in, type something in, click day 1, put in an hourly rate. Now shift number is correct. They have to check one of those. You can force it to be one or the other at the beginning. It's just not worth the effort for what we're doing. Okay, just remember that if they don't check one of these, you're going to get not an error, but it just won't be correct. There is no 0. Okay. All right, so let's go quickly and set some breakpoints and see what we got going on here. Got our declaration. I'll put a breakpoint here. Might as well put them here too. Go into the classes and put some, see what we can figure out how this is firing and working and doing its thing. Let's open up employee. Let's put one on the constructor. And open up production worker and put one on the constructor. All righty. Let's run this puppy and see what we get. Okay. Production worker is created before anything happens, all right? And remember, it is derived from employee. So we press F10. Now, guess what happened? Since it's derived from employee, it's going to back up and call the employee constructor and then go back and finish up with the production worker because it's inherited from it or derived from it, okay? They fire in order as required to create the object. So if I press F10, it does this, and then it goes back and does the constructor for production worker, okay? And so there we go. Now it's created. So let me press F5. I'm getting some code behind stuff you don't want to see. I don't know why that came up. Let's see. So there's everything. All right, let's go ahead and put some real data in here. And we'll just say it's day 1. Okay, now the click event fires first. All right, oops. Thingy coming up here. You don't need to see what that is because it's not germane to the video. It's a YouTube thing. F10 to step through. Is RDO day 1 check? Yes, it is. Now, you may be asking, and maybe you're not, but it's a good question. Why is it just RDO day 1 dot checked and not RDO day 1 dot checked equal true? Because this is a Boolean value regardless. It's only going to have 1 or 2 values, right? It's either going to be true or false. Well, you don't even need to compare it to true or false because if it's true, it's going to come down here and do this, all right? And that's why we do that. It's just kind of a shortcut. So if it's checked, and it is, it'll come in here and set this particular property for this production worker, the shift number to 1, all right? So let's press F10, we'll step through, it is true, because I just checked it. All right, now it pops up. All right, so that's what's going on there, and I'll go ahead and put, well, I'm worth a lot of money today. I wish I was making half that. Display. All right, I click the display button. I got a breakpoint there. So what it's going to do, just like in the other project 9, the other project, it's going to grab the numbers and the text and all this stuff and do some conversions and populate these 3 properties. okay? We already did the PD worker, okay? And because we created that object at the class level, it was created in the beginning. So F10, it's just grabbing that, grabbing that, grabbing that. And now it's going to pull this stuff back out. You're putting it in and you're pulling it back out. So that's all it's doing. It's just a property dot notation, all right? You saw that in Project 9. F10 to step through, and there it is. Okay, cool, huh? Now I didn't go through anything in here, and we could make this a lot more complicated than it is, but there's no need in it because the basic idea is just derived classes and that sort of thing. Obviously, if any of these change, this data is no longer valid, so you really need something in there to wipe it out. But I didn't do that, and I just told you why. So I believe that's it, folks. If you have any questions, let me know. This is a nice little, turned out to be a lot nicer than I thought it would. Okay? All right, I'll see you at the final. Enjoy.